Hello, everyone, and thanks again for joining us at the 2024 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Jacob Harrison, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panel, Power of Data, Using Data for Good Across Industries. Our panelists today are Nate Silver, statistician, author, and founder of the Silver Bulletin, Seth Moulton, U.S. Representative for Massachusetts 6th Congressional District, Alex Drain, co-founder and CEO of Archangels, and Will Blodgett, affordable housing developer and founder and CEO of Treadway. Our panel will be moderated by Corbin Petro, founding CEO of Eleanor Health and Benevera Health, and a healthcare entrepreneur. The panel will run for 45 minutes and will leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. Please submit questions via our Cadence app. You can navigate to this panel via the schedule pane in the menu and navigate to the Power of Data panel. Questions will be submitted in that event and then will be selected by our moderator. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Corbin.
Awesome, thank you, Jacob. And thanks to all the panelists for coming in. All of these folks unrelated to sports, so excited that we have an audience of people who are interested in other things besides sports. I was gonna make a joke about how this was the panel of people who are married to people in sports, but then we added Nate, and so everyone except Nate. So we're here talking about how to use data for good with lessons from people who are in industries and doing things that are leveraging data for the greater good. So I'm going to start with Nate. Nate recently, for those who haven't been watching the news, put out a great article that called on Gemini, which is Google's AI chatbot or AI tool, really called on them to question whether they should have released this into the public. And it really begs the question of what is the role of AI? What is the role of being right and true when you're putting products out in the market, particularly as we're leveraging data? So I wanted to just start with that, and Nate provide some context on your findings.
Yeah, so I have a new book which will be out in August called On the Edge, and kind of the climax of the book is about AI, the development of ChatGPT in particular, and talking about how it's one of the most important technologies invented since the internet, since the nuclear weapons potentially. But the product that Google released this month, or last month, I guess it's March now, is not a very good product. The first problems people noticed are that it had some prompts built into the system where if you asked it to draw historical figures, it would insist on making those figures racially and gender diverse. So you asked for it to draw like 1943 German soldiers, what I think you can actually historically call Nazi soldiers, right? It would make the, one like black Nazi and one like Asian female Nazi, like literally, people notice this, and it seems like if you're gonna be a $1.7 trillion market cap corporation, right? And then you're having woke Nazis, like that seems like a pretty bad idea potentially. But there are other issues too. The journalist Matt Taibbi just wrote a post about how when he asked Google Gemini for information about himself, it like entirely fabricated several fake controversies, called him anti-Semitic and things like that. So I mean, this is a product that is very not ready for prime time. It's kind of shocking because I use ChatGPT quite a bit, and it does what is called hallucinate sometimes. It will make up references or BS its way through situation where it doesn't know the answer, but not this kind of consistent whole cloth kind of, I would call it misinformation, right? Which seems like a big problem, right? I mean, Google is this company that you trust to be kind of like neutral and just this kind of purveyor of unbiased information, and it's a purveyor of misleading and biased information. No, I'm not much more forgiving than that because they're the ones who should have been more responsible with the product.
So to your point, your sort of reaction was take it down, fire these people, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever publicly called on people to be fired before. It's kind of a trope, but like this is a really big, and it's hurt their stock value, right? Their stock was down 4.5% on Monday, which 4.5% of 1.8 trillion is quite a bit. Yeah, look, I mean, I think the perception is now, and this is, I guess, in Silicon Valley like an old story, but like Google is now a powerful incumbent player, and the whole story of Silicon Valley is that powerful incumbents become too set in their ways, they become too beset by internal and external politics, and they get overtaken by smaller rivals. So I think they felt like they were under pressure to release something soon. But look, I'm someone who believes AI is a very powerful technology, and with great power comes great responsibility, and they acted irresponsibly.
But in their defense, like in some ways they were trying to use data for the greater good, right? They were trying to be woke and diverse and do all these things. Obviously, unintended consequences. So that, I think the question I'm going to ask Seth, because you're in sort of the government role, right? So we have to ask the question of like, okay, they bear responsibility potentially to their shareholders and others, their consumers and those who are using potentially long-term impacts that we have yet to fully understand. What's the government's role in starting to police this industry and this technology that's moving quicker and moving faster than we can potentially think to regulate?
Well, the first answer is we really have no idea, because social media has been around for 20 years and government is still debating whether or not we should regulate social media and how we might want to do it. And I think it's been a total utter failure. And so there are a lot of consequences to this. A lot of kids commit suicide because of social media. We see the impacts that it has on families and all sorts of things. And we still haven't figured out what to do. So I think from a government perspective, the reality is that we are not going to regulate AI because we're not going to be able to keep up with it. And so what we need to do is just figure out how we really focus on limiting the most dangerous edge cases, the places where AI could be as dangerous as nuclear weapons. And I've written about this a little bit. I think that we're very close to the point where AI gets used to automate warfare, where AI gets used to do things. I'm not saying we're super close to having AI sort of take over for humanity and end the world because it's in its self-interest, although that is a conceivable future. But it's very realistic that you're just going to have automated drones that work completely on their own. And if our enemies like Russia and China have these automated weapons, we're going to find ourselves very quickly at a potentially huge disadvantage. Why? Because they don't care about the sort of guardrails that we will put around those weapons for ourselves. So we're not going to put weapons out there that don't care about human rights or limiting collateral damage. But do you think Vladimir Putin cares about that? Do you think Xi Jinping cares about that? No. And the risk is, therefore, that they just flip a switch on theirs, or they're not even built to worry about these restrictions to make them safe. And so our robots lose to theirs because they just kill indiscriminately, and we're actually trying to be very careful and only shoot combatants, only shoot enemy soldiers. So the point is that I also agree AI is amazing. I think that the pace of discovery for cancer drugs is going to increase dramatically in just the next 5 years because of AI. Just to use one example of how powerful AI can be for good in society. But I think that if you're in a position of trying to protect society at the same time, we need to focus on these particular edge cases where it can be extremely dangerous in the wrong hands.
It's super interesting. So I felt like I had to start with AI just because of the timeliness of your article, Nate. So thank you for publishing it exactly when I wanted you to. But taking a step back, we're all here trying to figure out better ways to use data in sports. And some of the most advanced industries using data are those that are selling stuff to people. We're all here trying to use data to enrich people, to enrich people's lives, to take that data and to improve humanity. But often the industries that are using data for good, and I would argue sports as well, are behind those industries that are selling products and understanding every single move that we make on the internet. So I just want to ask the question of, maybe we'll start with Alex. How are you taking some of the lessons learned from some of those more mature industries in using data to help advance your mission and what you're doing at Archangels?
Yeah, because I was saying we do sell stuff. We are shameless hustlers. I would just say we're shameless hustlers for good. And the population that we're focused on is the 43% of adults who are serving as unpaid caregivers for a loved one, a child with a disability, a parent, a neighbor, someone with an addiction. And 70% of those individuals have at least one mental health impact. So what we're focused on constantly is how do we use data to inform the messaging that we're getting out there. We run campaigns to help someone who has no idea they're in this role. At least 43% of you are in this role, and you're not worried about you when you're in this role, you're worried about the person that you're caring about. So we're trying to run campaigns that are sometimes sassy and unorthodox to get those individuals to pick their head up for a second. A successful one is Archangels are badasses for good, and the intensity is real, what's your score? Men respond to that. Men are often unpaid caregivers and don't realize that they are. They're not doing half the work that the women are. I'm just going to get on the record and say that. But they are doing work, and they are disproportionately also having mental health impact. And what we then do is once they have that moment, we ask them a series of questions. We do not call it a survey, because I feel that surveys often feel like a hit and run. They ask someone a lot of questions about how they're doing, and then off they go with your data. Like, oh, so you're doing terribly. I'm so sorry. See you later. Thanks for the data. So what we do is we will respond in that moment by telling people about resources that exist for free that they might not have known about, provided by their employer, provided by their health plan, provided by the city, the state, the community as CBO. And those resources are going to help them with navigation. They're going to help them with respite. They're going to help them get them to something that helps them survive that moment. So in the end, the reason we're getting paid is we're finding these people that nobody else can find. We're engaging them, we're gathering a lot of data on them, we're giving something back to them, which is helping them feel seen in the role, get support in that role, but there is someone out there who's gonna make money by doing a better job caring for this person. And so that's why we do what we do. It kicks off a lot of data that states, for example, love, and I just have to take a moment and give a big fat shout out to you for 988, because a huge percentage of these individuals end up with suicidal ideation. And maybe you could describe at some point what 988 does, but it is a lifeline that literally saves lives for people like this 43% of adults.
No, it's super helpful. And I know from our conversation in surfacing sort of the language that you use, how you use that language, it's those more mature industries that are able to really capture on that. And I think about identity and intersectionality and how that plays into all of us and how we think about communicating with different audiences. And so I know you share. Maybe you could share an example of how you use the different identities that people hold themselves to engage them in the work that you do, because I think it's relevant to other industries as well.
Well, if you come back to that point, so if you're, and then tell me if I'm answering your question, if what you're doing to support, let's say, for example, an unpaid caregiver or whoever your target is using the language that you understand. So you would send out a campaign, an email, a poster, a social media thing that would say, are you an unpaid caregiver? And the vast majority of people who are would ignore you. If instead you said something like, are you the go-to person? Or are you the one everyone turns to for help, right? Can you ever go on vacation without worrying? The people who respond to that are actually the folks who are unpaid caregivers, but they don't realize they're in this role. And once you have them, then you can support them in it.
And I think the whole notion of capturing data from those who historically haven't been captured in the data sets, it almost gets back to Gemini, right? And like part of the challenge with AI is that the models are being fed by the data that exists, and we're not capturing it from some of the most vulnerable populations.
Well, when you were speaking, I was like, oh, crap in, crap out, right? Like, and a lot of the folks who we serve, and we also do a lot of work pro bono with communities of color, as an example, through faith-based leaders, I can guarantee you, most of the people that we're interacting with, they don't exist in a database. And so nobody is getting trained on the language that they're using, the things that they're thinking about, the issues that they're having, the ways that we could support them, because it doesn't exist in a way that is sort of farmable, I would say.
And Will, in many ways, you and Alex work with the same population. You're not in the caregiving space, you're in the affordable housing space. But in our conversations, I learned, at least, some of the data that you're capturing and using to enrich the lives of the people who are in the facilities that you manage. A lot of it are unpaid caregivers, and a lot of people are in positions where,
like a lot of their because they're unpaid caregivers and they don't have the means, they don't have the time to go out and earn a living because they have somebody at home that they have to take care of. I mean, I grew up poor in Chicago with a stutter. I still have a stutter, so I'll stutter a little bit. I apologize in advance. And a whole lot of my friends lived inside of the Chicago Housing Authority, and they tore the housing authority down on a Tuesday, and all my friends were gone on a Thursday. And I was kind of like, I sat there, I was like, I think I was 12 or 13 years old, and all my friends were gone, and I was trying to figure out what happened. And I began to study it, and I began to think about, are we here in America, like, is this the right type of system? And I came to the conclusion that yes, this is the right system, and you're always going to have an underclass in the system, but you need to have upward socio-economic mobility. And the three main components of that are healthcare, education, and housing, right? And the one that I work every day to help is to help to solve the housing problem. But that's not, but you can't do that alone. Like, you also need healthcare, education. And so we use all kinds of advanced statistics and data to make sure our housing is in areas that has good healthcare and education. And then two, to take care of the people that call our buildings home, right? And we do that in a whole host of ways, including around healthcare, but also around people that are living in affordable housing oftentimes because they don't have the money to pay the rent at other buildings, and sometimes they don't have the money to pay the rent in our buildings, even though that's like a huge amount of money is coming from HUD, et cetera. So we've partnered or also started our own stuff where we'll make you a loan at no interest to pay your rent. That's a high-risk loan, right? So we have to make sure that we have the analytics behind that we have a pretty high degree of certainty that doesn't get paid back. But when we make you that loan, or even if we don't make you a loan and you just pay your rent on time, historically, that has not improved your score of overall credit. So if you pay everything, like if you go in your life and you pay other things on time, that improves your credit score. But historically, if you paid your rent on time, it did not improve your credit score. That didn't make any sense to us, right? So we're now, we now have a partner in a group called Azuzu, where if the people in our buildings are paying their rent on time, we're reporting that to the credit agencies, and their credit score is going up. If they don't have the money, we're making them a no interest loan, and they're paying the rent, and that's being recorded, and the credit score is going up. And off of that, like if the home is the foundation, right? But then off of that home, now your score is going up, and you can get credit for other things like healthcare, education, to get a car. We have a lot of people that have lived in our buildings for a very long time that now have the credit score that is needed and required to get credit to purchase a home. So they've lived in quote unquote public housing their whole lives, and maybe they were there with their parents and their grandparents, and because of the different types of programs that we're putting into place, only because of the data that we have available to us, they're able to get the credit now and go up that rung of what I was speaking about earlier in socioeconomic mobility and purchase a home. And that's amazing. That's real impact.
What I love about that too is that you're innovating, right? You're taking data and you're understanding the population that you're serving through your housing, and you're doing something good. But I mean, you have LPs, you want a risk-adjusted return, and so please tell me this helps your risk-adjusted returns to do things good for the populations that you're serving.
Yeah, like 100%. So like if you're in a building with 250 people and the person across the home from you, across the hall from you is paying their rent on time, and then their scores of credit are improving, they're getting a car, and they're getting education, and then ultimately they're getting a home, you're straight across the hall from them, and you're saying to them what's going on, and they're saying, I'm paying my rent on time, and now I have the credit score, for a car, education, and a home, and if anything happens, I can get some access to capital for healthcare, et cetera. And now you see that hope, like you have that agency. Where in the past it was, you didn't really see the path. You didn't see the next step on that upward, socioeconomic, step. But you now see that step. And so you are incentivized to, one, take care of your home in a better way, but two, look, I mean, like of course a guy who goes out there and says the rent is too damn high. The rent is too damn high in a whole lot of places, but in our buildings, like it's not too damn high because it's set to a fixed percentage of your income, right? But you now have agency to say, hey, like there is hope for me. Like I see the person across the hall, I see the person upstairs, that person is paying their rent on time, and because of that, their scores of credit are going up or whatever it may be, and they're getting a car and they're getting this new job, and because of that they just purchased a home. And hope is an amazing thing, especially when it's tangible.
That's great. Nate, I want to come back to you and talk about, you're known for predicting things. Prediction has always been something that we try to leverage data to predict what's going to happen in the future. Obviously, the more and more data sets that we have, AI, other tools, how do we ensure that the underlying data set, so right, I mean, Will is capturing a data set that probably no one really has, and he's using it to support his business and to support his people. How do we ensure that the data sets that we're capturing are predicting in an accurate way, and that if our predictions are going wrong, like what are the long-term impacts of that?
Yeah, look, I mean, garbage in, garbage out is absolutely the appropriate phrase here. And there are different definitions depending on how small or large the data set is, right? If you're in a situation where you have kind of small batch data, right? Like really presidential election forecasting is kind of small data, not big data. We have like 17 elections since World War II where we have relevant economic and reliable economic data, 12 elections with reliable polling data, basically, right? I mean, you better be very careful about auditing your inputs and making sure that things make sense. I mean, this is where domain knowledge and experience come in a little bit, is the ability to like kind of do like a quick system one look at a part of an answer and say, this is wrong, right? You wouldn't get this answer. You wouldn't get, to take an obvious example, you wouldn't have, if a model says Trump is going to win Washington, D.C., right? You fucked something up, right? It's not just the model being unbiased. So having that training to look at larger data sets, right? And then you have like very large data sets like AI models use, basically all like human speech on the internet, where you have built-in biases because it reflects like the nature of human communication, right? I mean, the good problem that Google is trying to solve, or the bad problem they're trying to solve, right, is like if you train an AI on all human text dating back to the 1950s, most references to doctors will be men, to nurses will be women, so on and so forth, right? And so like you will reflect human biases if you don't find ways around that. You know, I don't think they have the right solution and way going to the other extreme and kind of inventing stuff whole cloth, but you have to be aware of when you have like a biased data collection process or when just the data itself kind of reflects human biases.
I mean, this is hard. Like we had some folks from OpenAI come in and speak to us in Congress, and it was an informal dinner, but I haven't seen a bigger turnout, Democrats and Republicans coming in a long time for something like this. Everyone knows this matters, right? And one of the things they went through at great length was to explain how they're being unbiased and politically fair. And a very savvy Republican asked a question about that and let them sort of, give a big expose on all the ways that they're being fair. And then she said, okay, well, I just asked ChatGPT to give me a quick bio of Nancy Pelosi and a quick bio of Donald Trump. And guess what? The bio of Nancy Pelosi was glowing, and the bio of Donald Trump was not so flattering, right? And so, that might comport well with points of view here in Massachusetts, but there are a lot of people in the room who are just like, how is that fair?
I mean, my proposal is that the AI lab should hire ex-journalists, maybe somewhat self-servingly. I want a job at OpenAI, but because, journalism
They're looking for jobs, folks.
I got plenty. I got many jobs. So journalism is losing headcounts, right? But journalism have wrestled with a long time, right? The Washington Post, the New York Times, the Boston Globe has to think about, if Trump is doing things that we think are objectively bad, then where's the way that we navigate that? We don't want to be too both sidesy, right? At the same time, we probably have our own biases, and so there are people thinking about this stuff. They're not usually technologists, and so I don't know. I think journalism actually has an interesting perspective on these things.
Yeah, but I think when you go to AI, you were speaking, have it be unbiased and also not unfair. But if you go through history, it is not unbiased and it is unfair, right? And so I think the article that you put out there, Nate, was we're going back to history to try to make it fair and try to make it unbiased. So, for example, the photo of a person who's literally in the Nazi, and that's insane. Yeah. If you go through history, it's ugly. Yeah. It's mean. There's a lot of faults. Yeah. But we have to speak about that. Otherwise, we are not going to learn from it. It's impossible. You only learn from your mistakes. And if you don't acknowledge your mistakes and admit your mistakes, you're never going to learn or get better.
It's true. I know we were talking about sort of the pros and cons of Gemini being out in the public realm, and they essentially put out a beta product, but pretended it was a ready for prime time product. But these tools need to learn, and they need as you said, Nate, sort of data in, junk data. It's all about data collection. What are some of the ways? So data collection has advanced a lot over the many years that we've been leveraging data for industries, for greater good, whatever you want to call it. Surveys used to be a big thing. I know many sports organizations still use, and other organizations still use surveys and other data. What are some of the methodologies that each of your organizations use to capture that data? Since you're not an Amazon, and you're not, thank goodness, right, Alex, not an Amazon or not a Facebook that has sort of reams of behavioral data that you can draw from.
Well, in some ways, it's interesting to hear you ask that question, because in some ways I feel like we as the United States government are relatively cautious about what data we collect. And we have some restrictions on that. And in fact, President Biden just issued an executive order trying to improve the privacy of people's data. But our adversaries don't think that way. And as a Marine veteran, I know, for example, that my entire security clearance form is now owned by the Chinese Communist Party because they hacked into the Office of Personnel Management and stole all of our security clearance forms. And they obviously are not doing that to send me a birthday card on time. They have some, we don't know exactly how they're going to use it, right? But it's not a good thing that they have all that data of everyone who's going to serve who served in the military in the last 20 years. So there are other governments that are using data very aggressively with nefarious purposes in mind. The Chinese government is also how many people have some sort of data on a hard drive or something that's encrypted? Basically anything you store on, say, Google Drive or whatnot. Anyone use Google Docs? All that stuff's encrypted, right? It's encrypted with standard encryption that we've used for the last 20 or 30 years. And guess what? When we get quantum computers, we can hack all of that. So what the Chinese Communist Party is doing right now is they're just downloading all of this encrypted data, which they can't read because it's encrypted. And as soon as they get quantum computers, they're going to be able to decrypt it all. It's called download now, decrypt later. And that's not good for us, right? Including highly classified material that somehow gets out there, but it's okay in theory because it's safe right now, but 10, 20 years from now, whenever they develop that quantum computer, they're going to be able to read all those emails that you never wanted anyone to see.
Yeah, like I think people, we shouldn't just throw our hands up and say we can't have better government, right, and more cooperative solutions around the world, right? When the nuclear bomb was created, tested in New Mexico, right, at the same time, the UN was being created. You can argue how effective the UN has been, but even people who were believers in mutually assured destruction and deterrence theory were like, you know what, sometimes people do irrational things, sometimes the game theory is wrong, so we should also have like institutions that are cooperative and more robust, and we're bringing these products into a world where even in the US we have like obviously lots of political polarization and friction, a decline in trust, right? People default to their prisoner's dilemma game theory solutions when they can't trust one another. And so this causes lots of problems, right?
So when we invented the nuclear weapon, a lot of those nuclear scientists, like Oppenheimer, how many's seen Oppenheimer? He spent a lot of time trying to create these international institutions to prevent nuclear proliferation because they realized they'd created something that could be used for good, clean power, but could also be really dangerous. I don't think you see that right now from a lot of AI scientists really saying, let me put down my career for a second and just go out and try to create the new version of the UN to make sure AI is never used for evil.
But the question I think is are we being intellectually honest with the data, right? And to kind of take what you guys are speaking about and put into one, when I was at the Housing Authority, the NYC Housing Authority was the biggest housing authority in the country. 1 in 8 people in New York, you know, are somehow associated with the Housing Authority. And I got there, and it said that our collection rate was 94%, which is an amazing, you know, like rate of collection. But I'm looking at it, and it doesn't make sense to me because I see like, here's all the money coming in, here's the money we're spending, if we had blah, blah. And this was what we took and reported to HUD. Okay, and HUD's like, look at how great the housing authorities do in New York City. They're collecting 94%. These guys are amazing. But the 6% that we're paying rent, we're making up for 25% of the actual dollars owed. So our collections were more like 69% or 72%. But HUD is getting reports from New York City Housing Authority that says they're collecting 94% because 94 out of 100 people paid their rent. Right? But it wasn't about the actual amount. So data in, data out, right? And I think, I just suspect, I don't know, people like to get the good information. And it was good information, and they didn't want to dig, and they didn't want to be, you know, intellectually honest with the information. And now we find ourselves in this, you know, spot.
Well, I think that thread on people want the good, I was going to throw it to you, Alex, because I know we talked a little bit about the use of surveys, the use of questions, and how you ask something in a more positive way, people are looking for the good, actually yields more productive outcomes and productive data that illustrates some of the negatives, right? If you ask it in a positive way. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about sort of your experience with surveys and.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is I love this conversation. I would consider myself an apocalyptimist, in that I think we have to believe that apocalyptic things can happen. And I own apocalyptimist.com, so don't try buying it. Because it's genius, and the CEO of Rand said it, so I'm gonna give him credit. But the notion is if we don't acknowledge that very, very horrifying things could happen, then we're not gonna do anything about it. And so this panel makes me happy because having really smart people talk about this, I don't understand AI at all. But I'm glad that people do. I'm optimistic that if we get people who are really smart and honorable and true working on it, then good things will happen, like what you're doing for folks who need housing, so thank you. I'll give you 2 silly examples. One is if you say to someone who you strongly suspect has a child who is obese, and you're speaking to their parent or guardian, and you say, are you struggling to keep your family active and eating well? 20% of people will say yes. If you literally change one word, are you working to keep your family active and eating well? 80% will say yes. So by asking it differently in a strength-based way, you get folks to be like, oh, thank you for acknowledging I'm working on it, because I am. And yes, I suck. And the reality is my kids eat like shit. But thank you for acknowledging I'm at least trying. If you say to someone, do you smoke, of a population that you're pretty sure everyone smokes, 30% will say yes. If you say, it doesn't really matter if you smoke or just know someone who does, we all know how hard it can be to quit. Do you want information about quitting? 70% of people will say yes. So I'm not making that person tell me if they are smoking or not. I'm just asking them a question that's actionable in a different way. And when you said the question before about where do we get our data, I mean, again, I said before, we're shameless hustlers anywhere we can. Because what we're looking for is people who are not responding. So we will do like an omni-channel campaign. And a lot of people respond, but rely on digital mediums. Like, okay, I'm an employer and I want information on who's an unpaid caregiver because from a prediction perspective, I know they're more likely to quit. They don't want to quit. Work is respite for them, but they're going to have to quit because of the scenario you just said. So if all I do is send out an email to my employee population that says, are you a caregiver, I'm not going to get the right people. So I'm going to use different language. I'm also going to use an omni-channel approach. I'm going to have posters that I'm hanging because a lot of frontline workers are going through a break room, right? Or I'm going to use a care card that a doctor who's interacting, or a nurse or a tech who's interacting with they're supposedly treating the patient who has Alzheimer's. And that is what they're doing in that meeting. They also know standing next to that person with dementia or cancer or whatever they have is the person who's actually doing all the work that is the unpaid caregiver. So now we have systems in place where that doctor or nurse or tech or whomever it is or social worker has in their pocket a care card, which is literally a little thing that says, some catchy phrase, and on the back is a QR code. And so when the doctor or provider is in that interaction and they don't have time to talk to the unpaid caregiver about the fact that some paid caregiver is now drinking too much alcohol and drinking like shit and not exercising and not taking care of their own screenings, they hand them this little thing and say, I see you, by the way. Thank you for what you do. When you get a moment, can you check in on yourself? Because what you're doing is awesome. So they're not pitying them. If you pity an unpaid caregiver, they will ignore you. They believe in what they're doing and they don't want you to say anything disrespectful about it. And we can't, in lifting up unpaid caregivers, without wanting to denigrate the person that they're caring for. So all of these things have to be considered as you create a system that has an omni-channel approach to find the people who are not opening your emails. They're not going to visit your human resources expert. They're not going to the employee assistance program. They're the ones who need the care the most. So you have to be shameless in finding them. You have to ask questions in a way that doesn't make them feel, I'll give you one other quick example. We ran a campaign because we got all excited about what if we used a task-based approach to finding people, like doing the laundry counts. And we were trying to find younger unpaid caregivers. We did this out through Instagram. And the population that we got, I'm going to read you the stats, we compared it directly to a campaign that instead was appealing to somebody. So doing the laundry counts versus giving all you got for family and friends, it can be a blessing. It can also be a lot, wherever you get your score. We got that language because we looked at the language that the Republicans use very successfully, right? So that's why we designed the campaign that way with that language. And we did another one, which is, because we know if you're an unpaid caregiver, what do you do to cope? Well, you drink. You also swear. Like, I'm really good at swearing. In my head, I'm quietly swearing all the time. What if we swear, sometimes out loud, I apologize. What if we swear because we care, which, by the way, can actually be a good thing, especially when we're in the red. Dare to swear and get your score. Of those 3 campaigns, the 2 that were highly and by far the most successful were not the task-based language. Because task-based language just made people remind themselves they're not doing their own laundry and they're behind doing the laundry of the people that they're caring for, and then they didn't want to engage. It was the ones that tapped into the beauty and grace and honor of the work that they were doing, because that's what unpaid caregivers will respond to, something that is about them being able to care for other people.
Can I just say that
long-winded way to get it.
This is kind of the whole point of 988, which is this new national mental health hotline that a bill that I passed into law. And the point is that people don't know what the National Suicide Hotline is, but if you make it simple so that people can remember and you can post it on signs, whether it's on bridges or next to train tracks, or post it in schools, people will remember 988. And it's incredible, like just since we switched from the 10-digit 800 number that no one knew to 988, calls have gone up 50%. And texts, because you can text 988 as well, which of course are what young people tend to do, texts are up 1,435%. which is an amazing measure of how many kids in America are getting help now when they're in that moment of crisis. But of course, it's also a sad measure of the need. But it's all about, we actually did the research before we passed the law into what 3 digits would be most memorable and are not confused with other like 911 or some other 611 or things like that that already exist. And, at the end of the day, this comes back to people, which I think is another really important point. Is we talk a lot about data and we talk about AI and we talk about these massive data sets and garbage in and garbage out, but I was sharing these statistics that I just shared with you about 988 to a middle school group that was sitting on the Capitol steps, to get a picture with a congressman or whatever. And after I made the case to them that this should matter to their lives, which I'm not sure was the best way to communicate with middle schoolers, like in terms of statistics and percentages, this woman came up to me and she interrupted. She said, "I'm sorry, sir, to bother you, to interrupt you, but I just want you to know that your law saved my daughter's life." And then she introduced me to her 13-year-old daughter. And I think that as a lawmaker, that was a really important moment, not just something that reminded me why I do this crazy job, but it also reminded that we can talk a lot about statistics and numbers, but this all comes back to humans, to lives.
But I love 988, and I just wanted to. So you think about 988. Obviously, a lot of people have used it. What's the responsibility of the government or the use of that data, which is essentially probably the largest data set of people who have suicidal ideation of any data set of its kind?
Actually, we had a lot of debates about this before we passed the law, because some people felt like, look, if someone calls, we need to immediately send a response team to their house. And when we looked at the data, we realized that if people knew that by calling this number, they would get a visit from the police, they weren't going to call the number. And so we actually made this very clear policy that, except in very, very small extreme circumstances, like you're not going to get the police sent to your home. You're just going to be able to talk to someone. And although there might be some instances where an aggressive intervention might have saved a life, it turns out that a lot more lives are saved by simply increasing the number of people who call. It's amazing, but somewhere over 90% of calls to 988 actually result in a life-saving intervention. So we're literally saving thousands of lives a month just because more people are calling.
So I'm gonna go to the. Go ahead.
I just want to give one other statistic on this, because one of my favorite quotes is, "Statistics are humans with the tears wiped away." Because I do think we have to remember, like inside that little spreadsheet is a cell, and that represents a human, each one of you, right? But just to really punctuate this point about suicidal ideation, if you split the country into 4 populations, and the first population is not in any caregiving role at all, 4.5% have actively thought about suicide in the last 30 days. Actively, that's how will I take my life. If you go to the next cohort, which is someone who's caring for, as a parent or guardian to one or multiple under 18, it doubles to 9%. If you go to, okay, you're caring for one or multiple over 18, it's 10%. Horrifying numbers. What do you think it is for sandwich generation? So you're caring for one or multiple under 18 at the same time that you're caring for one or multiple over 18. Take a guess. Someone shout out, what % of that population has actively thought about suicide in the last 30 days?
It's 25%.
It's 52%. Oof. So if you walk into a room with sandwich generation caregivers, it's more likely than not that they've actively thought about it. So I think these things, so all of us keeping that in our mind, keeping our eyes out for individuals, telling them about things like 988 in words that are not judgy, but very peer-based, I think is genuinely, you can't estimate how many lives are being saved.
So I have some audience questions. A reminder that about a third of this conference are students learning from everything. So I really liked this question. Coming from different industries, how would you describe your first experience with data and falling in love with it to understand its power for the work that you do? I mean,
That feels like a neat
it feels like
question.
a neat
Yeah,
question.
I mean, for me, it was about baseball. The Tigers were won the World Series in '84, and I was 6 years old, right? And like lots of data in baseball, and like I'm old enough now where you like get the newspaper, right? And you have like all the batting averages listed from, Wade Boggs to Mickey Tettleton or whatever. So that was it. It's always been applied, right? I'm not a pure math guy. I'm like, I want to solve problems. I want to play poker, right? I want to like get my hands dirty. And so, but starting with baseball as a kid.
Yeah, with me.
Do you want us to all answer or one person per question?
There are no rules here, Seth.
Rules? It's not the Congress.
We don't follow the rules in Congress.
We all want to hear your data love story, Seth, so if you want to share others.
No, someone else should go first. I don't have a great data love story.
With me, it was here at MIT. When I was here at MIT, I helped to run the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. I was in charge of special projects, which means I didn't do much. One thing that, I was sitting here and I was talking to somebody about the data and math, and he's like, look, if aliens, if they came down here and they didn't speak any languages, they would speak to us in math. And I was like, holy shit, that's amazing. And then I started to see the data in sports, and I began to see how that can be transcended across, everything. And I was like, this has a huge amount of impact, and this is incredibly powerful stuff.
I think I fell in love with it because I started recognizing that, I have a very emotion-full personality. I'm very effusive. I tell a lot of stories. And if you tell a lot of stories, eventually people's eyes start to gloss over. And they're like, oh, that's the person, they just tell a lot of stories, they don't do anything. So then I started only to talk about data. And then a certain part of the population is like, fucking, she's a data person. She knows what she's talking about, and they listen to you in a different kind of way. So for me, there's a credibility associated with being a data expert and knowing your data. But in the end, I realized it really is a dance, because data gives your brain permission to believe that something is true, whether it is or not. But stories engage the heart. And so really, if you want to be effective, in my experience, with making sustainable, scalable change happen, which matters to a bootstrapping entrepreneur, is you have to always do this dance, data stories. And so I'm always watching the audience wherever I am to be like, where are they going? Am I losing them? Did I just get too emotional? Data, data, data. And they're like, God, this woman's all stats all the time, shut up. I'm gonna tell you a story about my children, right? It's just beautiful. So you gotta shamelessly use both wherever you can, provided the data is valid and accurate.
Corbin, I'll just say this, that when I ran for office for the first time after having no experience in politics whatsoever, and I just said, hey, I want to be a reasonable, bipartisan guy, one of the phrases I used is, I'm a Democrat who can do math. You can interpret that as you'd like.
And I went to HBS.
So another question from Matt, going back to sort of the beginning part of the conversation. How do we encourage private corporations to act more responsibly with data? I'm gonna add in here, without the threat of regulation. How can we use data to prove the benefit of responsible use of data?
That's a good question. That's all you, Seth.
I'm gonna take a hard pass on that one.
I have an idea.
It's a private sector question, but I can try to answer it. Look, I think, the most effective regulations are not the ones that are just very, very particular and require a whole bunch of government bureaucrats to implement, but just incentivize people to do the right thing. So I do think that there should be consequences for misusing data. And I think that when, companies don't have, if companies lose all your credit card data and you get this email that says, oh, you got to get a new credit card, there are no consequences to that. You got to go through the trouble of changing all your, any place where you have that credit card saved, you got to change your number. But the company, might take a little hit to its stock, but not really, because it happens all the time. And I think that the leaders of these companies should actually be held accountable for not being careful with your data. And then they'll just do it, as opposed to having a whole bunch of government bureaucrats supervise exactly how it's done.
Yeah, because Silicon Valley thinks that Washington, D.C. is irrelevant, right? It's 3,000 miles away on the other coast, and it thinks people in D.C. are out of touch, right? Mm-hmm. You move fast and break things. And you have more and more, I'm a capitalist, I'm not like Elizabeth Warren or something, right? But you do have more and more concentrated power in the hands of fewer and fewer companies and people, to the point where so with the Gemini thing, this is not Google being profit maximizing. At least if you're profit maximizing, that's kind of predictable, right? It's saying we're so powerful, we don't really even need to be profit maximizing, right? And they kind of are operating almost like quasi-government entities anyway. You know, OpenAI has like a very weird governance structure as well. So like thinking about this kind of new world where like, you know, you start to have billionaires that have more wealth than entire countries in South America or whatever, that's a change, right? You don't have to be some like leftist to be worried about the fact that the, you know, 10 richest people in the world, their wealth is doubling roughly every 10 years and compounding interest, that becomes a big factor.
But don't worry, from their G5s, they're really in touch with the people.
I mean, I was going to say like the only way to do it is you have to incentivize people, but the problem is, as Nate just pointed out, some people in some of these companies have so much capital and so much money that they don't need the incentive either way, and that's why we need people like Seth, right? Because I don't know if there is a way. I honestly don't know if there is a way without having some type of intervention by government.
Or private companies like yours set the bar, right? You set the bar and you tell people like we're using data for all the right reasons, and guess what? We have, you know, higher EBITDA margins, and we have our folks are paying their rent on time, and we're doing, you know,
right.
Or you think that's a secret sauce and you don't want to share it.
No, I don't think it's secret sauce. But okay, I'm not a huge company. I'm not a small company. But I mean, this is not going to happen with my company, but it could, right? So it continues to grow. In comes PE, in comes the hedge funds. I go public. I'm no longer the CEO. We have a board, and all of a sudden, you become this huge organism unto yourself, you know, and it's very hard to steer.
Yeah.
Well, and that gets back to then who are you serving? Then you're serving shareholders. What you're doing now is serving the humans that you care about and maximizing for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And I'll just make one quick point on this. You know, there's a lot of concern out there, which I get with having like people like me in government, big scary government, say regulate social media, right? There's a lot of pushback at the idea that government might say what's true and what's false on social media. But one of the issues is that today it's just done by, you know, people in Silicon Valley in a black room who have zero accountability to any of you. I mean, you at least have to re-elect me, right? And I'm not saying that I should be the guy actually literally deciding what's true or not, but that's one of the problems.
It's not only people in Silicon Valley. TikTok is people in
that's right.
China. And they just hit the dial, I want to make you guys a bit more anti-Semitic, or I want to like increase racism in America. And they're just taking the dials, and everyone thinks it's their own, like it's not.
Right, and just so everyone knows, TikTok does that, just so we know.
So, Seth, you talked about social media. I heard you on a podcast saying like Congress is literally just trying to figure out what social media is today, and it's been around for 20 years. So I think probably the last question here is, you know, why do we accept the premise that government can't keep up with innovation, although I just essentially said that you can't, instead of investing in innovation, remaining current or future looking?
That's a great question. Well, look, I'm not saying that government shouldn't try. And one of the ways, by the way, that I try to help government keep up on innovation is just to try to get younger people involved in government. It turns out that, you know, the average age of Congress is way above the average age of this room. And a lot of people don't understand how this works, you know? I once tried to send an email to one of our party leaders, and I got all this pushback saying, I just want her email address, right? And, you know, it turns out that like, hey, we were the first office to use Slack, and we set, you know, the pace for using Slack in Congress. But this other particular office of some pretty powerful person hadn't even got an email address yet. So I think that government, you know, can do more to try to keep up, but at the same time, like, let's just face reality here, and let's try to have a smart strategy for how we address the things that are really threatening out there. And I think this is just really relevant to AI. Like, we're not going to keep up with AI, but there are a couple of narrow places where it could be really dangerous. So let's just focus on those.
Maybe we need to have an age cap to serve in Congress. You cannot be over the age of 70.
I think that would be a great idea, but I get in trouble with a lot of colleagues for saying that.
And more pay, like seriously, right? I don't see any particular reason why you wouldn't want analytically gifted people who could go make a lot of money working for a sports team or working for Google or working in finance, right? You're still gonna make a sacrifice, but if you paid the average member of Congress like 2x as much or 3x as much, right? Then I don't know, that might reduce the amount of need to make money on the side, and I think would reward the skill sets that we want.
I won't say my
Makes
position
Seth's
on that,
wife
but my
happy.
wife and kids would agree.
Okay.
I mean, I think in Congress you should
But
make.
there's a simple reason why we don't have an age limit. It's because these rules were set 200 years ago.
I
And
think-
everyone died at 50, so it didn't matter,
I think
right?
there's another reason too, though, which is there's a thing called experiential learning. And I know some 75-year-olds who, thank goodness they're in the room, when a overly funded VC-backed 31-year-old is making a decision to do something that could be very harmful. So I think, any absolute statement, like age is a thing, I mean, it's like, where do you draw the line? When is an elder for a reason, and wisdom is wisdom for a reason? You want that voice in the room. And why can't we have more intergenerational?
Or maybe get rid of the
Take
lower
a
age
test,
limits,
you
right? Like 18 or over,
take
right?
a test.
Because you want representation in Congress, and the fact that you don't have representation, right? You have a skew toward older people, and so maybe we should have a bright 19-year-old tic-tac star in Congress or something.
Yeah, I would love that. I think it's an and. I think we need more intergenerational mixing.
I mean, this is very similar to what Michael Rubin was saying this morning. He surrounds himself with younger people, 23-year-olds, 16-year-olds, but then he's also best friends with Robert Kraft, who he mentioned 18 times in the discussion. So I think we're out of time. So I think that's a good way to end.
I think you bought him a car.
So thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.